Good evening. I'm Karen Heimer, and I'm very honored to introduce Janet Laritsen, the president of the American Society of Criminology. Janet is Curator's Distinguished Professor Emerita in the Department of Criminology and Criminal Justice at the University of Missouri, St. Louis. She's been a core member of the UMSL faculty criminology program since she started her career, and she was on the team of faculty who built the department's PhD program and shepherded it through the years as it became one of the top programs in the country. Janet's conducted research on a range of topics, including juvenile delinquency, adolescent sexual behavior, and the age crime debate. However, as you all know, her heart and passion are centered on victimization research. She has conducted pioneering research on the victim-offender overlap, patterns of repeat victimization, the effects of place, time, and social context on violent victimization, victim-offender relationships, patterns of victimization across sex, poverty status, race and ethnicity, and sexual orientation. Janet and I first started working together, I think it's about 15 years ago, but I didn't really want to count. What? It's 20? Oh, wow. Okay. Anyway, I've been privileged, I'm 5 years more privileged, to collaborate and learn so much from her over the past score of years. Janet's one of the foremost experts on methodological issues involved in the measurement of crime, particularly with regard to the National Crime Victimization Survey, as everybody in this room probably knows. She's published on many aspects of the NCVS, from measurement of high-frequency, repeat, self-reported victimizations to comparisons of trends in violence based on the NCVS as compared to the Uniform Crime Reports, and the list goes on, in addition to all the substantive research that's not all about methodology. She's often been asked by the Bureau of Justice Statistics to research and write about thorny issues that come up in using the National Crime Victimization Survey. Regardless of where her research attention is focused, Janet's work is of the highest scientific quality. It's creative, careful, and honest. There are many things to admire and respect about Janet, and one of the qualities that I most admire and respect is that she is a dedicated scientist first and foremost. And the inquisitiveness and rigor that she brings to each and every project has earned her the much-deserved reputation as one of the most influential scholars of victimization. Because of her unique expertise and accomplishments and her tireless efforts to push forward standards of data collection and measurement, she was appointed chair of a panel formed by the Committee on National Statistics and the Committee on Law and Justice. Her committee was charged with thoroughly studying our crime data sources and generating recommendations for modernizing our nation's crime statistics. Can you imagine a gargantuan task? Her work chairing this panel produced 2 volumes published by the National Academy of Sciences that address the issues and promise of our crime data in the United States. These volumes are chock full of brilliant insights and recommendations that are currently shaping efforts to improve crime data in our country. In sum, because of her commitment to high-quality scientific research and her tireless efforts to improve data, Janet is a world leader in research on victimization and violence. She's also served on numerous other national panels, committees of the ASC, advisory roles to BJS, and she was co-editor of Criminology. In recognition for her contributions, Janet's a fellow of the American Society of Criminology. She's received the University of Missouri's Chancellor's Award for Excellence in Research, and she was named National Associate of the National Research Council. She also has been honored as a recipient of the Governor's Award for Excellence in Teaching in the state of Missouri. I'd like to end my introduction with a few comments from Janet's former PhD students and colleagues at UMSL. They're all good, though. I sanitized. Okay. From a former student. This actually, I got a little teary with this one. I do not know another scholar in our field who I more want to emulate, both in my personal and professional life. I learned from Janet how to become a reliable and caring mentor, a meticulous and honest researcher, a genuinely thoughtful and committed professor. From her colleagues, this is one I had to work on. When thinking, just kidding. I'm really just kidding. They knew better. When thinking about how to describe Janet as a colleague, the words, this is from them, the words fearlessly principled come to mind. Never one to balk at dissenting opinions, even those of Rick. She's also quick to find humor in everything. As an example, when the university proposed, I love this one, I remember this one too. When the university proposed a new, convoluted, you guys know this, system of tracking our work, Janet, which was aptly named at UMSL, I suppose, My Vita, Janet asked, "Why don't I just give you my Vita?" She's known for championing junior colleagues and working for what she believes to be just and right. Her UMSL colleagues say, and anyone who knows or has worked with Janet knows this, that she is, this is a quote from them again, uncompromising in her principles and pursues what she believes is right with a level of rationality, grace, and good humor that inspires us all. I echo these sentiments based on my own experience. Janet is incredibly generous with her time. She's an honest and principled scientist and colleague. She has a wicked wit, always delivered with either a very straight face or that wry smile, which she may be doing right now. And she's fiercely loyal and supportive, which I really appreciate. Thank you, Janet, for being such a wonderful colleague to so many of us. We've all been lucky this year to have Janet leading the ASC, and I'd like you to join me in also thanking Janet for her work and care over this year as president of the American Society of Criminology. Thank you. She's got the wry smile on.
She's trying to knock me off my feet a little bit here before I get started. Thank you, Karen. That was very kind, and I think. So before I start, I just want to say that my substantive passion is in the field of victimization, but I knew that who my Justice Award recipient was going to be this evening, and so I leave that whole wonderful discussion that Lenore Anderson gave us. I leave that all here with you, and I'm going to move on to something different that's also been a passion of mine. But as I said, please check her book. It's amazing. Okay, so each year, the president of the American Society of Criminology is asked to perform several honorary tasks, and as I just mentioned, this is the most very rewarding task, was to select the recipient for the President's Justice Award. But presidents are also expected to select a theme for the annual meeting and present a presidential address. I selected the theme, The Future of Criminology, with the hope that it might generate a broad and diverse range of discussions about the opportunities and challenges we currently face in our research and professional work, and how we might continue to advance and thrive as a field, address important scholarly and policy questions, and ensure the relevance of our work into the future. I'll admit that one of the reasons I chose the theme is because on more than a handful of occasions I found it difficult to grasp where the field is heading, and I wanted to hear from colleagues what they were most hopeful and most concerned about. And I'll also admit that producing a presidential address has been much more problematic for me than I anticipated 3 years ago when I was asked to consider appearing on the ballot. It's become clear to us all how important macro conditions such as the pandemic, climate change, technological changes, and the economy are to our daily lives, and we wouldn't be surprised to hear that these conditions affect the level and nature of crime, responses to crime, as well as the content and outcomes of our own criminological research. At the same time, we're faced with increasing public distrust in science and academia, decreasing confidence in core social institutions, and serious threats to democracy in the United States and elsewhere. In times of unusual uncertainties, it's not surprising that many of us are worried about the future of many issues, and perhaps the future of criminology as well. Others among us may be less worried and believe there are reasons for hope. For example, there are many signs of positive social changes in recent years, such as the growth of a wide range of grassroots and collaborative efforts designed to improve the conditions of people's lives and solve common problems, such as the Alliance. Some of these efforts are devoted to crime reduction and legal system reforms, and many of them are being done with greater awareness of findings from research about the latent or sociostructural sources of crime that have been known to criminologists for many decades, and with knowledge about the more proximate conditions that contribute to criminal events. Some of this work is focused on assisting victims of crimes in multiple ways and helping to reduce some of the harms that result from violence and other forms of crime. And it's the persistent successes of many of these efforts that suggest that perhaps some level of optimism about the relevance of criminology in the future is warranted. I know from attending more than 30 years of ASC meetings that past presidents have spoken about many different topics, and that most of them have shared insights from their own areas of scholarship, as well as suggestions about how we might advance knowledge on issues critical to the concerns of the field. I'll follow this tradition and draw on aspects of my professional experiences to discuss a few ways in which criminology can build upon the past and adapt to some of the challenges we currently face. My comments are intended to press for ongoing discussions that might help ensure the ability of the field to continue doing the kind of work that serves the common good. Can I get a, thank you. I begin with the fundamental need to significantly improve and expand our crime data infrastructure. In his 2017 presidential address to the ASC, Jim Lynch discussed the increasing availability of open source information on the internet and in administrative records data, and he provided a detailed discussion about the range of challenges and opportunities involved in developing these record systems in ways that would allow for the study of individual case outcomes across various stages of the legal system. He also considered how traditional academic practices need to change to accomplish this valuable work. My comments here are analogous in several ways. However, my focus is on data about the occurrence and nature of crime. At this point in time, the crime data that we have is primarily focused on personal violence and property crime, often referred to by criminologists as index or street crimes. Although a wealth of many important insights about the multiple causes of these crimes have resulted from existing data, there are many types of crime that are a great concern to society for which we are unable to answer basic questions about the levels and trends and the frequency with which they occur. For example, trends in financial law violations, frauds against government agencies, embezzlements and pilferages against businesses have never been included in the annual report widely known as Crime in the United States, which has been heavily relied upon by the media and the public. The amount of economic harm that results from these theft crimes compared to the losses associated with the thefts, robberies, and burglaries that we do measure well is challenging to assess. It's also difficult to know the level and rate of increase or decrease in many other crimes, such as environmental law violations by businesses or persons, or the magnitude of increases in cyber-facilitated attacks against persons, computers, small and large businesses, governments, and infrastructure. These basic gaps are a problem for a field that claims to specialize in knowledge about crime. It's likely that many of you have been contacted by media or others asking questions about how often a particular crime occurs and whether it's increasing or decreasing, only to find yourself responding with answers such as, "We don't know," or "I'm not aware of any data that can answer that question." Members of the public who would like to be well informed about crime are left wondering how this can be possible in an era that seems awash in data. The selective and incomplete picture of crime that we do have makes it easier for politicians and other vested interests to exploit concerns about street crimes for their own ends, while disregarding many other forms of crime. Policy analysts cannot accurately determine whether resources are adequate for responding to crimes that are not well measured, or whether programmatic, legislative, or target hardening efforts to prevent or reduce their occurrence are effective. The modernization of crime data is critical for providing an empirically sound and more complete description of the nature, distribution, and extent of different forms of crime, who is most affected and victimized by these crimes, and the extent of harm resulting from these incidents. This general point was made in 2 reports released by the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine's panel on modernizing the nation's crime statistics, for which I served as a member and as chairperson. Involving multiple years of work by an interdisciplinary group of scholars, practitioners, and stakeholders, the panel recommended a new classification system for crime and suggested methodological and implementation strategies for collecting data based on this updated crime classification. These efforts constituted the first major reassessment of the definition and coverage of crime statistics since the USCR program was developed in 1929. And just imagine if this was the same in healthcare, for example. In my view, these 2 reports should be required reading for criminologists, particularly for graduate students and young scholars who want to focus their skills and talents on an area where the need for new knowledge is great. The reports contain a wealth of information about the recommended classification for crime, which has relied heavily on the groundbreaking work of the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crimes draft of an international crime classification for statistical purposes. And the reports also include discussions of the methodological and practical challenges involved in producing a more comprehensive and useful set of crime data. Currently, the major data sources that criminologists are most familiar with are in the process of revision and expansion. It was during this time period that the panel was working that these decisions were announced and changes became underway. We're all aware of the fact that the FBI's UCR program, which compiles information on crimes known to law enforcement, shifted from the long-standing summary reporting system to the National Incident-Based Reporting System, otherwise known as NIBRS, beginning in January of last year. This recent shift results in a data system with much more detailed information about offenses known to the police because the data allow for reporting of multiple offenses within a single incident, and it includes other details about the incident, the victims, and perpetrators when such information is reported. Many additional crime types beyond the well-known street crimes are also included in the NIBRS system, as is data on whether the incident was cleared with an arrest. The transition to NIBRS, however, has resulted in lower coverage rates than were available in the summary system, with many large cities not yet providing crime data to the FBI program. Coverage has increased since 2021 and hopefully will continue to do so. Unfortunately, the reduction in police department participation for the 2021 data year made it that much easier recently for politicians to misrepresent or speak selectively about recent changes in crime during their 2022 campaigns, though, of course, it's quite likely that many would have done so anyway. It should be noted that the panel viewed NIBRS as a critical improvement, but also as an incomplete step. One recommendation, for example, was to clarify the category of aggravated assault to better delineate the nature in which firearms and lethal weapons are used, while other recommendations included additions to the victim, offender, and incident attributes and changes that make it possible to learn more about crimes affecting different types of victims, such as organizations, computer systems, as well as persons, and whether the crime was cyber facilitated. Some of these changes are underway, and although we're all familiar with the limitation that the data do exclude crimes unknown to the police, NIBRS will be especially valuable because of their flexibility to provide more detail for jurisdictional comparisons now for 52 specific types of offenses, including, for example, negligent homicide, simple assault, animal cruelty, purchasing prostitution services, and vandalism. However, if the data are to have value, their validity and reliability must be assessed prior to use. And I'm happy to see there have been multiple sessions at this year's meeting here, and in which researchers discuss some of the critical data assessment work. The other major source of U.S. crime data, the National Crime Victimization Survey, sponsored by the Bureau of Justice Statistics, is also undergoing expansion and a major redesign. Recent changes to the survey and the new instrument and methodology will significantly advance our understanding of victimization risk and related topics, and do so in unique ways. One example is the new financial fraud supplement, which provides national estimates of crimes such as charity and phantom debt fraud, product and services fraud, and loan and romance scams. The NCVS fraud supplement estimated in 2017 that the number of victims of financial fraud in the U.S. was just over 3 million persons that year. To place this number in context, in that same year, there were an estimated 3.1 million persons victimized by violence and about 9 million households victimized by burglary, motor vehicle theft, or other household thefts. The magnitude of these personal fraud estimates reminds us that the nature of crime and victimization changes over time, and therefore it's possible that overall theft in the U.S. may not have decreased to the extent suggested by research based on our traditional data sources. Other very valuable updates to the NCVS will occur when the anticipated redesigned survey is phased in during 2024, at which time the survey will ask all respondents questions that measure the person's perceptions about police performance and about crime and public safety. This is the first time for the survey. In addition, the increase in the NCVS sample size that began several years ago will make it possible for some comparisons of victimization, levels of reporting to the police, and other crime-related concerns across the largest states and metropolitan areas in the United States. Thus, the good news about crime data is that both the UCR and NCVS are undergoing historic changes that will provide new and enriched data on both traditional and other forms of crime, as well as comparative data on related issues of concern to the public. For other forms of crime, new data are necessary. And to give you a sense of what kinds of crime data we're lacking, I'm going to briefly show. Here are the main categories from the recommended crime classification in the panel's reports. The classification itself was designed to be a rigorous classification for statistical purposes and therefore exhaustive of all crime with clear definitions to partition offenses into mutually exclusive categories. As with all classification systems, the panel also recognized that the proposed classification would need to be subject to modifications and updates over time. The first 5 major categories here are generally well covered in our data sources, but for categories 8 through 11, data are much more sparse and incomplete. And to provide some sense of what we lack, I'll give you an excerpt in the next few slides about what we're missing. I know it's hard to read, and I can't read it either from here with these glasses on, so I'll let it sit for about 10 seconds and go to the next one. Here we have some particularly pertinent ones about tax evasion and other kinds of violations against public order. Acts related to elections, etc. Acts against national security, public safety. Acts against the environment and against animals. And then other types of criminal acts, including violations of military or tribal law, torture, genocide, war crimes, and other crimes. Many reasons exist for why we lack this information. One reason is that some of these offenses do not fall under the jurisdiction of local police departments. So when they occur, they may be reported by victims or others on their behalf to banks and credit card companies, state agencies like consumer protection offices, health and senior service offices, or state attorneys general. They might also be reported to federal agencies such as the Environmental Protection Agency, the IRS, the Federal Trade Commission, Securities and Exchange, and the list goes on and on. Offenses known to these entities, these federal entities, have never been included in the annual Crime in the U.S. report. At the present time, determining the frequency, costs, and other outcomes of these missing offenses is a major undertaking. Another reason that some offenses do not appear in crime data, particularly those under federal jurisdiction, is that the result of an investigation is a decision to file civil rather than criminal charges. The classification proposed by the panel does not make distinctions between civil and criminal offenses. The reasoning behind this decision is discussed at length in the reports, but I'll note that the main reason for the focus on behavior rather than statute is that it results in a clearer typology than one based on attempts to find a common denominator in the language of statute and criminal legal text across all states and jurisdictions over time in the U.S. Offenses that end up with civil rather than criminal penalties do not appear in traditional crime data sources despite the scope of their harms, nor does research involving civil law violations appear much in our traditional criminology outlets. Finding and developing the data necessary to understand the full range of crime will not be an easy task. Many types of offenses will be much more difficult to enumerate than the traditional street crimes, and simple counts can be misleading or uninformative. For example, a single ransomware attack might hobble the personal computer of one victim, or it might shut down the operations of an entire hospital, school, municipality, resulting in many more victims and more extensive damage and costs. Environmental violations do not lend themselves to simple counting rules when the violation continues over extended time periods and affects entire communities. For this reason, the panel highlighted the fact that new and alternative metrics must be researched and developed. This will be challenging work that can often be contentious as well, but it'll provide fundamental information for understanding and responding to many forms of crime. Although the panel's work was focused on modernizing the nation's crime statistics infrastructure, I argue that some of its value lies in pointing out our over-reliance on traditional methodologies for too long. Criminologists have relied on data from police departments, victim surveys, and self-report surveys of offending, particularly among youth, to study crime. Surveys have been valuable methodology because they help us get around the well-known problems associated with UCR data, and because they've allowed us to obtain additional information to assess the theoretical mechanisms and risk factors associated with victimization and with participating in crime and deviance at the individual level. Yet survey research itself is becoming increasingly threatened as a methodology for data collection, and this situation is unlikely to improve in the future. Those who've tried to gather survey data outside of the college classroom know that access to subjects is challenging and respondent participation is often very low. Participation rates in most surveys, other than those conducted by the Census Bureau, are typically 30% or much less, and low response rates are at higher risk for providing biased statistics and findings. Unfortunately, many users often ignore or make unfounded assumptions about how potential non-response bias might affect the validity of their findings, but we're aware there's an issue and we can take a look at that and research it further. Response rates have been declining continuously over the past 15 years in federal surveys, which if continued unabated will affect the entire national statistical system. The Census Bureau collects data from more than 130 economic and demographic surveys on a range of indicators about the welfare of the country, including victimization in health, poverty, inequality, and wealth, labor force participation, unemployment, education, and the state of the economy. In response to this emerging challenge, a series of reports by the National Academy's panel on the scope, components, and key characteristics of a 21st data infrastructure is underway to discuss the issues surrounding a new national data infrastructure, including governance, the capabilities, techniques, and methods required, and the sharing of data assets from federal, state, and local governments, institutions, private sector, and elsewhere. Recommendations for how this work should proceed in the immediate and long term are part of these ongoing assessments, and thus criminology is not alone in its need to reconsider how it must work to develop the data necessary not only for evidence-based policymaking, but for describing the state of crime in the nation. To say this work will be critical, complex, and fundamental is an understatement. The first report from the new panel's report, it's just recent, emphasizes the fact that the existing data ecosystem is evolving rapidly, and that one of the key attributes of new statistical aggregate data will require the development of blended data from multiple sources to counterbalance strengths and weaknesses in the data in order to generate more detailed, timely, and useful information than is currently available. For criminologists, much of the effort for improving crime data and statistics will require collaborative efforts with local, state, and federal agencies, in part because administrative and regulatory data are the only source of information about some of the offenses in the crime classification, while for other offenses, it'll be useful to draw on data from public health, businesses, as well as nonprofit and other organizations. Research partnerships and collaborations must be used because the nature of what needs to be done simply cannot be accomplished by a few academic researchers working alone. And this work will require new resources to mount, coordinate, and govern these efforts to assess the quality and usefulness of the new and more detailed crime data. Fortunately, criminologists have made some significant efforts that provide insights about what will need to be done to develop and provide new and useful information about crime. And I'll briefly note 3 examples here. One example is the work by Sally Simpson and Peter Yeager, who studied the processes by which a comprehensive federal white-collar violations data system might be developed. There are considerations about the administrative and other data flows that could inform this series, and the strengths and weaknesses of the data that can be expected to be obtained from the records provide foundational insights about the processes for developing these indicators. Importantly, they discuss how organizational barriers for data sharing can be made surmountable when agencies come to view these efforts as providing new important information for improving their own practices and for evaluating the quality of their own data. When administrative data is the critical starting point for the development of crime estimates, researchers often must help agencies understand the value of the indicators for providing accountability to stakeholders and the public, and for improving agency operations. Open source data also have provided options for measuring other forms of crime. The development of open source data by the National Consortium for the Study of Terrorism and the Responses to Terrorism, otherwise known as START, is a second example of foundational work for measuring, documenting, and better understanding forms of crime that are missing from our traditional sources. The well-known START Global Terrorism Database, developed by Gary Lafree and colleagues, is a particularly valuable model for open source work, and START's data gathering also has resulted in information about related issues, such as individual radicalization and the motivation and characteristics of hate crime offenders. Their carefully conceptualized, verified, and publicly available data make it especially useful for understanding levels and trends in these forms of crime. A third example of an important data development involves the use of data from social media channels, chat sites, and the dark web in an effort to understand the development and progression of different forms of cyber-dependent crimes. The Evidence-Based Cybersecurity Research Group at Georgia State University engages in observational and other types of research that can result, importantly, in practical and non-punitive crime prevention strategies, as well as insights into how criminal events unfold. This kind of data gathering also may have the potential to provide estimates of some crime types that can be triangulated against administrative records data. A recent example of their research involves the monitoring of sites to study the online market for stolen checks. According to Center Director David Mayman, the center's researchers detected large increases in the number of stolen checks for sale on the web, from roughly 100 checks per week in 2020 to 2,000 and now more per week in 2022, as well as information about how the thefts and the fencing operations for stolen checks take place in the current online environment. In response to an inquiry from Congresswoman Norton about the problem of stolen checks in July of this year, the U.S. Postal Service reported that in fiscal year 2021, they initiated over 1,000 mail theft cases, resulting in 1,500 arrests and 1,300 convictions. Whether this response had anything to do with the current problem is not discussed, nor was information provided about the extent of the mail theft problem or recent changes in its occurrence noted. I was unable to find the necessary data to assess this on their website, despite the fact that reports of mail theft can be directly reported to the U.S. Postal Service on that site. It's worth noting that the increases found in the center's data coincided with a 400% increase in robberies against postal carriers, according to an internal U.S. Postal Service memo. And both increases coincided with a policy change to halt postal police officer patrols in 2020. This example points not only to the value of data triangulation against administrative records, but also to the importance of timeliness for crime prevention, decision-making, one of the key issues of importance to victims and potential victims of many forms of crime. As scholars, we all know we need to be able to describe our phenomenon before we can predict or understand it or prevent it. One of the most challenging hurdles to improving crime data is the need to develop a stronger federal coordination and governance role for producing valid, reliable, and timely statistics. The panel's recommendation several years ago was that the way to move this work forward should begin with the Office of Management and Budget, because that entity is best suited for managing the complex set of federal agencies and state and private authorities who will be called on to contribute to crime data. At the time the panel completed its work, several members of the panel and I met with OMB to discuss the recommendations, and my impression at that time was that there was interest in moving this coordination and governance work forward. However, those discussions took place shortly before Trump was elected. And since that time, I've not heard about any serious movements to begin this work. This does not necessarily mean that the effort's been completely forgotten, but it does indicate how important it is to have the executive branch of the federal government committed to providing the resources to develop the data that are critical for setting priorities and policymaking. My own view is that without strengthened federal coordination and governance for crime statistics that operated under the transparent and well-established principles and practices of a federal statistical agency, we will continue to be plagued not only with incomplete crime data, but with increasingly competing so-called facts about crime put forth by private companies with proprietary methodologies or by organizations and individuals with vested financial and advocacy interests in their depictions of crime. So how can criminologists contribute to overcoming these crime data challenges? I do not claim to have all the answers, but rather a few modest suggestions about how the field can begin to serve a critical role in defining and producing the facts about crime. We have much expertise in our organization about many forms of crime, but given the level of specialization in current research practices, it's unlikely that many of us are able to grasp the full scope of our data needs. To begin, the National Academy reports on modernizing crime statistics and the Academy's ongoing work to inform this 21st century statistical data infrastructure should be considered essential reading if you want to be informed about those issues. A useful second step would be to fill in the crime classification, some of the categories that you saw that were proposed in the panel's first report, with information about potential data sources for crime, as the panel had done with both NIBRS and NCVS data at the time we were writing the first report. Ideally, filling in this crime classification would involve a BJS ad hoc working group and involve criminologists, practitioners, data holders, and with a wide range of knowledge about types of crime that are not well measured. The combination of knowledge from those in and outside the agency is necessary to further progress on our crime data. And as information about data grows for each of these offense categories, a straightforward documentation of this would serve as a major resource, not just for academics, but also for journalists, policymakers, and the public. Having had the opportunity to work with many BJS statisticians throughout my career, I can attest to the fact that the staff in that agency have outstanding data skills and commitment to the work, many whom have held on through a very difficult political climate over the past, But the agency has been chronically under-resourced for the demands placed on them, and it's imperative that they receive the necessary federal resources to develop these and new and important crime measures. A third useful step would be for the field to pay closer scholarly attention to crime data developments and assessments. Peer-reviewed articles about crime data and its strengths and weaknesses do not often appear in our journals, and the relative lack of such articles should give us pause. Why is this the case? There are many possible reasons, but rather than engage the debate, I'll simply encourage journals to take seriously the importance of informing the field about data development for crimes that are not well represented in our traditional data sources, as well as for the new crime type data that will be emerging from the NIBRS transition. We certainly don't need any more journals, but rather more frequent publishing of peer-reviewed data articles or briefs to benefit both scholarly and the public's interests. We're all aware that there have been serious threats to democracy and governance in the US as well as elsewhere in the world. And some US commentators have noted that the power to set government policy is becoming increasingly disconnected from public opinion. The recent overturning of Roe v. Wade is the most obvious example of this. Disinformation campaigns about many issues have become increasingly prevalent and undermine efforts to establish sound scientific facts necessary for engaging in evidence-based policymaking concerning a wide range of phenomena. Under these conditions, it's easy to become disheartened about the continued relevance of our work, but I see no alternative for criminologists other than to continue to press for developing the facts about the occurrence of crime and rigorous analyses of those data, and to communicate that knowledge to the public, the media, and policymakers in as plain language as possible. I also encourage the ASC and its members to continue to strongly support the scientific and statistical data infrastructure of the US. It's easy to forget about things, but once they're gone, they're gone. Even though our membership employs a wide variety of quantitative and qualitative methodologies, and our opinions about best approaches and political issues may differ, I hope we can agree to continue to support the work that provides an empirically sound and more complete description of the nature, distribution, and extent of different forms of crime and its harms. We are the experts, and this is no longer an issue we can continue to ignore. Thank you. This is every president's favorite part. I'm so pleased to introduce to you Professor Shad Maruna. He is professor in the School of Social Sciences, Education, and Social Work at Queen's University, Belfast, and he is your new president of the American Society of Criminology.
the speed with which she handed me this, it was nearly blinding. I have, I won't keep you for any time at all. I just have the privilege of thanking Janet for a tremendous year as president. Obviously, you see all the work this week, but I've been shadowing her for a year now and watching, and it's been an incredibly busy time. The society is still in incredibly good shape, but as you can imagine, a global pandemic and all the changes we're facing, it's been a challenging year, and we've a number of new developments and initiatives. You probably noticed some of them around the conference, but also on the website, and I encourage you to have a look at some of the new things that Janet has helped develop in this past year. I've been privileged to be on the exec as the president-elect. Next year I become president, but Janet doesn't really get to disappear. She stays as past president in that kind of Obi-Wan role, where she will continue to guide me, and I really couldn't ask for a better mentor and guide in the work that I'm looking forward to carrying on next year. So with no further ado, I'm told I am to hit this and officially close just the presidential panel, not the conference. There's still things to do tomorrow. All right, there we go. Be gone with you. You did it.